As we have been reporting, President Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and European leaders this morning. The virtual call came just days ahead of Trump's high-stakes meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO Ivo Daalder joins us now. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. When we talk about this meeting, given that Ukrainian President Zelenskyy will not be there, what are your expectations for these talks?
Well, they're low in terms of an outcome that will actually resolve the conflict. That's impossible without having the actual parties to this conflict at the table. And that includes not just Ukraine, but also Europe, which is going to be required to provide Ukraine with the security assurances and guarantees necessary, no matter what happens at the end of this negotiation. Somebody will have to guarantee the security of Ukraine, and that somebody is likely to be the European countries. So what this meeting is as President Trump has said, is at best a meeting to take the temperature of each other, to find out whether there is a prospect of Russia, which after all is the aggressor, agreeing to some kind of ceasefire. That is, I think, as much as we can hope to achieve.
Yeah, we talk about the stakes of this meeting for the parties involved, but when it comes to our NATO allies, what are the stakes of this meeting for them?
Well, they're extraordinarily high because, after all, the future of their security is tied up directly to the security of Ukraine. And a meeting between Russia, the aggressor in this case, and the United States, which has explicitly said under President Trump is that it doesn't believe what is happening in this conflict is of direct security importance of the United States. It's a very strange meeting. We would have thought that the first most important meeting with the Russians would have been with the Ukrainians. That was originally the intent and indeed the purpose of this meeting. But now we're going ahead, and the U.S. is going to have a meeting with the aggressor. Not only that, on U.S. soil, of all places, in order to, I guess, find out how much Mr. Putin wants to end the war.
Also unusual that it's coming together so quickly, too. Ambassador, President Trump is saying there will be, quote, very severe consequences if Putin does not end the war. Do those kinds of threats actually matter to Putin?
Well, they would if, in fact, President Putin were to believe it. But, of course, these threats have been made by President Trump now for many, many months. Indeed, on Friday was his deadline to implement those very severe consequences and threats. And then he decided that it was more important to have a summit meeting on U.S. soil with the aggressor nation. So if I'm Vladimir Putin, I believe that I will come to this meeting and we'll be able to talk whatever severe consequences are on the table, to talk those off the table. I don't think that this is a threat that Vladimir Putin believes. If the president is real about this threat, that threat should have been implemented a long time ago and before having any meetings with Russia, to make clear that where the president of the United States stands. Does it stand with Russia or does it stand with Ukraine? Right now, the answer to that question really isn't clear.
And Ambassador, given the circumstances, the rather unusual ones surrounding this meeting, if there's one thing that we should be watching out for on Friday, what would that be, you think?
The one thing I'm most worried about is the president of the United States coming out of the meeting and said, we have a deal, we're ready, peace is at hand. That's the kind of thing that I worry about, because, of course, there cannot be any peace without Ukraine being part of the decision-making process. And, of course, Ukraine's not at the table. So I worry about that. The best that I hope we can come out with is President Trump saying, I now understand what Putin wants. I'm going back to have the discussions with the Europeans and the Ukrainians, and together we will come up with a package and a policy proposal, set of proposals to take back to President Putin. And the next meeting will be not only with the U.S. and Russia at the table, but with Ukraine at the table and the Europeans at the table. That is the only way we're ever going to resolve this question, through negotiations.
Well, we in the world will be watching. Ambassador Ivo Daalder, thank you very much for your time and for your insight.
My pleasure.